you very much for this. I move now to try to unpack some aspects of the journey of professionalization. So again, in your area of work, what were the processes of professionalization? What were the main triggers and what were the main critical stages?
2019 is an important year because it's 100 years since the opening of the register within the UK. So back in 1919, the registration process was introduced and the register was introduced. Not for all fields of practice in nursing, it was only for what we call general nursing or what we would now call adult nursing. But very quickly the other fields of practice all joined that register. So in a sense that was probably the first point because you've now got a regulating body. Yeah. There was then probably a very long period where there was some development but very little. Really, when you get into the 1960s and 70s and into the 80s, certainly within the UK, so you see some pressure building from within the profession itself. Rosemary White's work talks about generalists and professionalists and educationists, and those latter two groups really came together to sort of form a bit of a momentum within the profession, within nursing itself. And then really, I suppose there are some sort of key landmark moments. One of the landmark moments certainly would be the publication of something called A New Preparation for Practice, which was Project 2000. Yeah. That was published in 1986. And what that did was it said actually there was a need for an academic qualification. So up until that point, nurses did their training. It was very much an apprenticeship style training within the NHS. And what this did, once it was adopted and became policy and was implemented, meant that nursing education moved into the higher education sector. So we became part of universities. Universities awarded those diplomas. Eventually that became an all-graduate profession in the 1990s. And you know, they are the sort of key moments, I would say, in terms of where we've got to now. A more modern moment probably would be the last outcome of the Research Excellence Framework, that assessment exercise that happens in universities, where for the very first time we started to see nursing departments providing good research that was being assessed at a nationally recognised and internationally recognised level. And who knows what the next step might be, what the next key moment might be.
Thank you. Bob, what was the reasons or the triggers behind starting the professionalization in paramedics?
It's very tricky to actually point to one individual trigger or one event, but we know that we had standardised training to some extent from 1966, and in 1985 we had a national extended training scheme to train what we now call a paramedic. That was at that stage a very American term, and it was perhaps shunned by the UK market. And we'd gone through a very nasty, drawn-out dispute. It wasn't ever actually a strike, but it was an industrial dispute in 89-90, where it was interesting things that came out of the Hansard reports and things in government, where trying to define what is a paramedic, who is a paramedic, how many did we actually have, and quite dismissively a few people said they're just glorified taxi drivers. Yeah. And I think it rankled with ambulance staff and people who were extended trained, myself included in that, who felt that no, we're much more than just glorified taxi drivers. And we tried to define it. So through the 90s we were exploring the value of the education of what became a paramedic, talking to universities in the UK, such as Hertfordshire, that were one of the pioneers in this work. And from that came a position where we had the very first graduate programme set up in 1998 for direct entries. And that, through 98-99, caused ripples across the country where people started to talk about a voluntary register and could we actually join the CPSM, who are now known as the HCPC. And we had a vote, and right across the nation, there was only about 8,000 paramedics in that era, and there was a big majority who wanted to go down that path, and by the year 2000 we joined the register. Did we know exactly what we were taking on? Probably not.
Yeah.
But I think today people wouldn't turn it back because it is there to protect the public. That's what its primary reason was for registration. I think that's one of the key triggers, and there's been a number of big publications that came out in and around that era, things like Taking Healthcare to the Patient and others, documents of that era, Life in the Fast Lane, that actually set us down a path where we could be more than what we were currently doing. And also we never felt that we owned our own professional status. I don't mean to be disrespectful because my daughter's a doctor, but doctors felt that they had a massive say in what happened in the ambulance world. Today, with a professionalisation, we've stepped into having our own autonomy, we've stepped into having our own independence, we have our own publications, our own journals, we have our own research, and we don't want to work as a silo, we don't want to be on our own, but we do want to work with our own setting of what is really important for us, at the same time working as a team across healthcare. So yeah, I think we wouldn't turn the clock back, but we learned lots of lessons on the route.
We will come to these lessons in a minute, but Denise, reflecting in both journeys and the triggers behind them, now the police seems to is going through a very similar route. Do you have any reflections on that, and what do you think about the beginning of the policing, especially in the project that we are in at the moment, implementing transformation, police learning and development? Massive part of what we are doing is helping and supporting departments of learning and development in the police to cope with these changes.
I think if you actually look at sort of policing as a profession, that the idea of professionalisation is actually quite not new. So if you look historically, it's something that, you know, particularly there's kind of key literature that looks at attempts at professionalisation in policing, so it's not necessarily something that's just happened. I think it's going back to the previous point, it's become much more formalised, and I think that's been kind of driven really by the establishment of the College of Policing, who were seen as, I suppose, an independent sort of body for the police. And since, particularly in England and Wales, I think the emergence of the College of Policing as a driver towards the police qualifications framework and making the police a graduate profession, I think it's been a big trigger towards kind of making some of the issues around, you know, evidence-based practice more formalised. But again, it's not like it didn't exist in the past. I think it's just a shift in the journey, and it's by bringing a graduate profession and making that kind of mandatory, I think that has been a key driver to then look at, you know, I suppose the workforce across the board, and to think about that broader professionalisation piece. So I think that's a kind of key driver. I think also there's kind of broader policing strategies. So if you look at Policing Vision 2025, I think that's been a big, you know, driver towards workforce transformation kind of for the police particularly. And within that document, it outlines obviously the complexities of the police role and what police are currently have, and that shift in policing because of new types and forms of criminality, different types of criminality. So you could use cybercrime as an example, and that realisation that actually the workforce needs new or different skills to be able to deal with those complexities. So I think, you know, that there's been triggers because of the I suppose the different challenges now that the organisation are facing. So it's not like professionalisation didn't exist or that evidence-based. There's police journals, for example, that already exist. There's higher education, you know, higher education institutions and police partnerships that have existed for a number of years. So they're not new, but I think it's just the formalisation has happened because of, you know, things like the establishment of the College of Policing and drivers like Policing Vision 2025 and working towards that, and the realisation that actually we need to equip our staff in an appropriate manner to support them to achieve the goals of the organisation.